Hey, welcome back to the channel. It is time for another short story of exactly 1,000 words inspired by a piece of artwork and music. Written on the spot today is a fun one because the title actually inspired it quite a bit. I'll talk more about that when we look at the artwork. So what was the soundtrack? What did I listen to? Well, it's a very sci-fi piece, as you can tell from the thumbnail. I went back to an artist I had not listened to for a very, very long time. One of the most creative film composers I believe I've ever heard, and his name is Clint Mansell. And I listened to The Moon Soundtrack, a film directed by Duncan Jones, which I absolutely love. It's one of those great movies that came out of nowhere, directed by a relatively unknown director. And it's an amazing example of what kind of story you can tell with such a small cast. And that's another reason why I love it so much. When the writer really doesn't give himself much to work with, but he creates a very compelling character piece that I should probably watch again. It's been a while. It's been a while. So cue up the Lunar Symphonies and let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled I Didn't Think of a Title. It's by a senior concept artist named Raphael Ragimov from Moscow, Russia. First, what caught my eye was the composition. It's nothing completely special here. If you take a close look, there's just two guys over here. One guy, he's working on some kind of, I don't know, some kind of mechanical object. It looks like he has robotic arms, or at least one robotic arm. The other guy is staring off into the distance to this giant, almost like Eye of Sauron kind of thing, with these vehicles floating around it, and they're just in this massive, almost industrial-like complex of some kind. But the fact that it was called I Didn't Think of a Title really struck me, more so than the artwork even. Even though I really love the artwork, I'm not trying to talk down on the artwork at all, but this is one of those situations where the title really fed my ideas. It started to be the genesis of a story or an idea of a story, and so I decided to see where that one would take me. Thank you, Raphael, for the inspiring title, even though you were honest and said I didn't think of a title. I love it. All right, well, let's see what I came up with. Strange how fire can look like water, how it flows and crashes and froths. A wave there, then gone. A new one resurfaces to dance with the others, to become them. What would one call such a thing? He'd know when the time came. These are the thoughts that flooded Duncan's mind as he stood mesmerized by the hive core, a writhing ball of energy that controlled everything. How much longer? Duncan asked QWERTY. Arguably more machine than man at this point, he was hunched over the service node decrypting the cauldronic mainframe to create a chiral portal, resetting the core and thereby giving them reign over the hive. In other words, to rule the world. QWERTY delicately guided the service node's arm. Clavs are stalled, gyrons are fluid, and power diversion is imminent. You look like you're stirring a pot with that thing, Duncan said. In Federation standard, please. You sound like a fucking robot. QWERTY raised his mechanical arm, all rods and pistons, and clacked his 3 fingers that looked more like tongs. Almost. 49.35% to be precise. Jesus, Duncan said. He rolled his shoulders, the jetpack strap there heavy with a reminder of what he had to do next. A mythological man, QWERTY said, composed of a collection of individuals to create a unified archetype that would provide spiritual sanctuary, but also be the impetus of wars and later inspire... QWERTY? Yes, Duncan. Why do I give a fuck? The hive core reflected on QWERTY's visor and all its fluidic glory, but shrunken down so small Duncan could hold it in his hand. Because you are about to become a powerful man, a powerful archetype. Duncan chewed the inside of his cheek. And you're telling me all this is a cautionary tale, right? That my name will be something cute and benign at first, giving people all the feel-goods, and then drive star systems to war only to fizzle to a sad legend that gives people a bad taste in their mouths, or worse? Duncan? Duncan liked the sound of his name. Yeah? I'm just fucking with you. QWERTY wheezed out a laugh that was very human and went back to work. Asshole, Duncan said, and went back to being mesmerized. That fire, that water, that whatever it was illuminated the entire trench sector, whose grandeur Duncan hadn't appreciated until now. Maybe it was the idea of what the future held, how he would direct it, what he would name it. Still, it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Catwalks, scaffolding, beams and cables crisscrossed vistas that had no ceilings, no walls, all ejecting from an ancient structure his people had built upon, erasing the bedrock of what had come before. Volumetric light cradled all of this in its glory. Duncan raised his hand and caressed the distant repair drones that hovered around the core, delivering fuel catalysts. Though he was a few hundred meters away, he truly felt their worn surfaces, and assured them, too, that he would provide for them. "You used to be a drone pilot," he said to QWERTY. "What was it like?" "Long hours. The mind link is brutal. Until you get used to it, which you never do." "I know," Duncan said. "Why'd you ask then?" "I needed to hear you say it." QWERTY scoffed. "Listen to you, sounding all savior-like. Am I supposed to believe you've transcended and you're not the same Duncan who would start fires in trash bins? Strategically placed around fuel canisters, set up like a giant domino game that went boom?" Duncan turned from his view of the dying and birthing plasmatic waves. "Almost done? Because I don't have time for this." QWERTY's visor reflected Duncan, with the distant core behind his head. It was off-center, so he shifted his stance. There. Perfect. Like a crown. "Yeah," QWERTY said. "Good." Duncan relished in the core once again. It was larger now, pulsing to a new beat. QWERTY did his job well. Too well. Duncan shouldn't have spoken to him like that. After all, he couldn't do this alone, even though he had the most difficult part, the part that could end him or begin him. Duncan checked his pack's monitor, then its shoulder straps. Digital vitals didn't matter if his pack fell off. Everything looked good. Too good. It couldn't be this easy, right? Why had no one attempted it before? Slaves too long, he supposed. Squashed under the 2 times Earth gravity, physically and metaphorically. Not him. Not QWERTY. Duncan said. "Where'd we go?" QWERTY strutted around the service node as if a primitive man discovering fire for the first time. Duncan smiled, as if he had a choice. "Sorry," he finished. QWERTY didn't hear, still circling the node. Duncan would tell him one day. After all of this was his. QWERTY stopped to catch his breath. Human enough, Duncan supposed. Duncan powered his pack, tested comms, navigational systems, everything. Twice. He left the ground, and the ground left him. He nodded to his subjects. The drones, the struggling laborers staring at welding sparks. Tiny dots, like distant stars. They didn't see him, but he saw them. 100 meters, crackled QWERTY on the comms. It was cold up here, except for the pack's exhaust on the backs of Duncan's legs. 50 meters. Duncan was a single-celled organism, dropping into the miasma. Ready for... "Name it," QWERTY said. "Name it?" "The system, your empire. Whatever you want to fucking call it. It needs a fucking name, a title." Inspiration hadn't struck, like it should have. A man facing a god to become one. "Don't tell me you don't have one." "Fuck, I told you this. As part of the Caldric Declaration of the Code Base, this thing needs a fucking name to execute. You know this. You knew this." He did know this. He knew this. Duncan shuttled toward the core without inspiration, without time, burning hotter than a bin fire. And boom. Welcome to the End Reviewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe what I learned. And I don't really have a ton to talk about in the story, but there are some definite failings here, or at least one big one that I really struggled with. I sat here for some time trying to figure out a way to remedy it. And honestly, it's the core of the story being, I didn't think of a title. So I didn't think of a title is exactly the problem I created for myself, because we know that we have this guy named Duncan who was named after Duncan Jones, who directed Moon. He's about to become the ruler of, I guess, the known universe. I have no idea, the star system, whatever it may be, but or a god even, he calls himself. And we can see him contemplating this divinity that is about to allegedly happen if his buddy QWERTY takes over. But at its heart, at the heart of this story is about the fact that this guy needed to name his new world, his new existence, his new universe, whatever it's going to be. And he failed to come up with something, alas, unfortunately. And that ended in his demise. And so what I was trying to do is think of a way to introduce that concept, right? Because at the end, you understand, okay, I get it. He didn't think of a title. He doomed himself. He doomed everybody. He destroyed this entire world even. And I alluded to it definitely right in the beginning in the first paragraph, which I'll talk about. but it didn't feel like a strong enough link to where once you get to the end, you see the breadcrumbs that I left for you. But let us begin here. I started him just kind of looking at this thing, right? He's observing it. He's in love with it. He's mesmerized by it. He's thinking about these waves and these fires. And, you know, fire definitely looks like water. It's a very fluidic surface if you really look closely enough. And this is the first time I hinted this. I added this much later. What would one call such a thing? He'd know when the time came. And so I was trying to build this thing around having faith, around being a messiah, one might say. And then I wanted it to be almost like Icarus, right? Icarus flying into the sun and his wings melting, something like that. But I didn't want to make it fully Icarus. And so I was alluding to more the standard Christian divinity, I guess, with crowns and things like that. He can hold the world in his palm of his hands. And so there's a lot of little things there that I alluded to that I enjoyed the imagery of, that I thought they fit his headspace of what he's contemplating becoming a god. But again, the title thing, I just didn't quite get it. And so he has banter with his buddy QWERTY, and I named him QWERTY, kind of in the spirit of Gertie, right? Who was the robot in the movie Moon. But I thought QWERTY would be funny, and this was another thing I was trying to think of is how do I make sense of that name, or how do I describe the origin of it? And I was thinking, because he does that robotic arm, that maybe he can't type anymore, and so therein lies the joke. And I was thinking too, maybe if Duncan named him, he has a skill with naming things, or he's known for naming things. But again, you know, you've read the story, you've listened to it, you know that didn't quite happen. And the fun thing about sci-fi is making up just random shit that doesn't matter, right? So he's decrypting a cauldronic mainframe to create a chiral portal, resetting the core, and thereby giving them reign over the hive. And so I wanted to have a little bit of levity with this one. I wanted to have fun with it. I didn't want it to be overly serious. I know a lot of times I write pretty heavy stuff, like last week with the girl who, or the woman who lost her children and is mourning them. She even lost her husband, and it's just kind of a disaster. I wanted something a little bit funny here. And so I have these two guys just going back and forth, and you know, QWERTY's more robotic, arguably, right? He even pokes fun at it himself when he starts just bringing up clavs are stalled, gyrons are fluid, and power divergent imminent, and then Duncan, who is the more grounded individual, the one to become the divine force, one could say, he tells me he sounds like a fucking robot. And so therein lies the humor. I was trying to, and then, you know, QWERTY, he doesn't balk at it. He just fires back with, he's 49.35% to be precise. So I wanted to create kind of just a little friendship between these two. I wanted them to feel normal, approachable. I didn't want to have one of them feel like he has this, or has had this God complex for so long. Someone who's just grounded, right? And that's hopefully what I achieved there, is I wanted these two guys to be just two guys up to no good, kind of like the two guys in Weird Science trying to create a woman, but they're trying to create a new world by harnessing the power of this portal, this energy source, whatever it is, the hive core as I call it. And then I start alluding to the religious aspects of it, because when he's saying Jesus as a curse, not as invoking the name of Jesus, QWERTY goes along with it and starts rattling off like the computer he's been accused of being. But he says, why do I give a fuck? But then QWERTY continues to counter with more serious lines of he's about to become a powerful man, a powerful archetype. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to slowly build upon his psyche, his God complex, his megalomania, whatever you want to call it, but then bring him down, right? Bring him back down to reality. And I don't think I completely solved that. Like I said, I think there would have been a nice sobering moment at the end when he realizes everything hits the fan. And I did link it with the trash bin fires, because clearly these guys have been friends for a long time, maybe even since childhood. And Duncan was known for causing fires in alleyways or whatever it may be. And that was kind of the link toward the end when everything went boom. And here we have QWERTY messing with him again when he counters after this serious bout of, I'm just fucking with you. This isn't serious. Nothing in it is except what we're going to do. And this is another line here where I said, Duncan liked the sound of his name, which is further reinforcing his big-headedness, right? He's starting to cross over. He's starting to become what he thinks he needs to be or wants to be. But I wanted to keep these people, like I said, grounded with common language, with swear words, stuff like that, so they're much more approachable, rather than having some elitist guy ordering around this little robot. And then I get into describing the location, right? Because I hadn't done that yet. Normally I do that pretty quickly or right away. And I knew I had to paint this picture because it's quite vast. We have all these things protruding out into the distance, into this endless haze, and we have this massive power source. Like I said, it kind of looks like the Eye of Sauron. I took an entire paragraph, which isn't very long, but you know, hopefully long enough. These short stories are very short to describe that. And he's even exhibiting more godlike qualities, where he's raising his hand and he's caressing the distant repair drones that hovered around the core. So he's out there feeling it, kind of like I'm crushing your head if you've ever seen Kids in the Hall. But he's using that distance to transcend, right? He's reaching across that distance, at least metaphorically, to give them that God hand approach, or the caress of a god. And then he starts asking Cordy about being a drone pilot, because I'm trying to give a little bit description as to what those things are out there. And then he says he knows. He just needed him to hear that, which is a strange thing that Cordy counters with, wow, you're sounding all savior-like. And this is when I give the backstory of Duncan's pyromania. I don't know, destructive nature, what it may be. This is when we're starting to talk about him starting fires in trash bins and then placing them around like a domino game strategically to make everything explode. But this is when his friendship kind of separates momentarily. Momentarily, though, is when he just says, almost done because I don't have time for this. And rather than countering, Cordy just concedes, says, yeah, that's fine, I'm done. Almost as if he's anticipating or trying to acclimate to what is going to happen, what his friend is going to become, potentially. But Duncan immediately regrets it and starts to apologize here when he's about to say, I'm sorry. But everything is a go. And Duncan, he gets off the ground before he says, I'm sorry to Cordy, or before Cordy even hears him, and he's floating toward there on his jetpack. The countdown is happening until Cordy tells him to name it. And he's like, what? He's like lost at everything. He's been so trapped by his ideas of grandeur and being a god, et cetera, ruler of the universe, that he forgot to name it, even though in the very first paragraph, he knew when it would come. He knew that he would figure it out once the time came. However, inspiration hadn't struck like it should have, a man facing a god to become one. Cordy's panicking, and then this is where I link the final thing of burning hotter than a bin fire, and boom. And alas, their existence is wiped clean. Like I said, what I did like is sort of peppering in the actual like godlike, the descent into madness maybe, but not quite, of Duncan through the imagery of him saying he can hold stuff in his hands, particularly the reflection of the hive core in Cordy's goggles, and as well as him just stepping in the right direction to make it form a crown. Just different imagery like that. And he's kind of losing himself, right? He's losing himself to his ideas, to his own mind. And at the very end, he's taken back to his childhood, which I didn't allude to clear enough. I think I can probably fix that later, where we're sort of bringing him down all these notches. He's just a regular guy, and he forgot to name this thing. He couldn't name this thing. I wish, like I said, I would have created a more ironic reason why he couldn't come up with a name. Maybe, like I said, he was the one who created QWERTY. Maybe he had some kind of knack with naming things, or he had a great knack with language. And for whatever reason, he drew a blank at this moment, probably the most important part of his entire life. And unfortunately, it ended with a boom. Well, that is it for me. Hope you enjoyed the story. I think the funnest thing about this whole thing was the title, right? I didn't think of a title actually inspired the story because, when you look at this, it doesn't look particularly different than anything you've ever seen before, right? We have these two guys in a sci-fi environment. They're looking at something that is massive, this massive Eye of Sauron, and who knows what they're going to do. There's no apparent story seed there, but the title helps, so it made my job all that much easier. So let me know, how difficult is it for you to create a title? Are they important to you? Are they just set dressing? Do they not matter too much? Me, however, they are extremely important to me, as important as the book cover itself. Because again, it's sort of the first thing people see. But let me know about your projects, how things are going, and don't forget, keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.